My daughter Karen sent me an article a few months ago. She does that occasionally, clips things, sends them with a note. It's a way we've found to be in contact without the full weight of our complicated history. The article was about what people regret not letting go of sooner. Karen included a handwritten note. She said, "Mom, I thought of you." I read it. I thought about it for 2 days. Then I called her and said, "Which part did you think of me for?" She said, "All of it." There was a pause. The kind of pause Karen and I are still learning how to sit inside. We've gotten better at not filling every silence immediately. That took years, decades if I'm being accurate. I said, "You were right to think of me." She said, "I know, Mom." We talked for 40 minutes after that, about nothing in particular, about everything, quietly. That's what letting go looks like in practice, not a declaration. A 40-minute phone call that would have been impossible 5 years ago. My name is Pat Walsh. I'm 80 years old. I was a hospital administrator for 30 years. I held things together for a very long time. And I've spent the last several years, slowly, not dramatically, putting things down. I want to tell you about 7 of them, not because I think you should do exactly what I did, because knowing what someone else has released sometimes makes it easier to identify what you're still holding. And because the article Karen sent was good. But reading about letting go and actually doing it are different disciplines. I can only speak to doing it, which I've done badly and slowly and with more resistance than I'd like to admit. The first thing I stopped caring about, what my retirement looks like from the outside. When I left my career in 2006, or rather when I was gracefully pushed toward the exit, I immediately constructed a retirement that would look legitimate, active, purposeful, structured, committees, volunteer roles, a schedule that would have alarmed a 40-year-old. I wasn't doing it because I wanted to. I was doing it because I was afraid that retirement without a full schedule looked like giving up, like being finished. My friend Elaine, who I've talked about before, who died last year, said to me once, "Pat, who is this schedule for? Because it's not for you." She was right. It was for the imaginary audience. The people I imagined were evaluating whether my post-career life was impressive enough. At some point, I gave that up, not overnight, slowly. I dropped a committee, then another, then stopped replacing them. And the space that opened up was not emptiness, it was mine. For the first time in decades, it was actually mine. What I found in that space surprised me. I started reading again, not reports, not professional journals, history, biography, things I'd been meaning to read since my 40s and never had time for. I started taking longer walks. I started calling people I hadn't spoken to in years, not because it served anything, just because I thought of them. None of that was on the committees. All of it was mine, and none of it would have happened if I'd kept filling the schedule to look busy. The imaginary audience was never watching. They never are. That's the other thing nobody tells you. You perform for a crowd that has its own life to worry about. Put the performance down. Nobody notices, and the freedom is extraordinary. The second thing I stopped caring about, Being right in arguments that don't matter anymore. I thought I gave this up years ago. I was wrong. The need to be right is more persistent than I expected. It shows up in small places. In a conversation with Michael, when he describes something from his childhood differently than I remember it. In a discussion with Karen, where I have accurate information about something and she doesn't credit it. I used to correct the record. I used to stand in the accuracy. I used to make sure the version of events that matched mine was the one that prevailed. And one evening, driving home from Karen's, I asked myself, what does it gain me? If I'm right about this memory, if I establish that my version is the accurate one, what actually happens? The answer, consistently, was nothing. The memory still meant what it meant to her. The relationship between us was unchanged. She didn't feel closer to me for being corrected. Letting it go cost me almost nothing. Holding on to it cost me something real. There's something else I noticed. When I stopped correcting, the conversations got better. Not immediately, but over time. Because being corrected closes people. Not dramatically, they don't storm off, but there's a small closing, a withdrawal of a few degrees. And if you do that consistently over enough years, the cumulative effect is significant. Karen once said, this was years ago, and she said it carefully, "Mom, sometimes I don't tell you things because I already know how you'll respond." That sentence sat with me for a long time. I knew what she meant. I responded by being right, reliably, accurately, and completely unhelpfully. Being right is a small satisfaction. Being the person someone tells things to is a large one. I chose wrong for many years. I'm choosing differently now. The third thing I stopped caring about, other people's opinion of how I handled my divorce. This one took longer than it should have. When Frank and I divorced in 1998, there were people, family members, some former colleagues, who had opinions. Some felt I had abandoned the marriage. Some felt I had stayed too long. Some felt that women who put career above family were getting what they deserved. None of these people had been inside my marriage. None of them knew what happened at our kitchen table. None of them knew the silences. And yet I spent years, more years than I want to admit, carrying their opinions, adjusting my behavior to manage how the story looked, making decisions partly based on how they would register to people who didn't have the full picture. At some point, I was maybe 75, I put that down. I put it down because I started to understand. The people who were judging me were working with 3/4 of the information and all of their own assumptions. Their opinion is a function of their experience, not mine. It was never mine to carry in the first place. But I want to say something honest about that. Putting it down was not the same as not feeling it. The opinions still registered. They still landed. What changed was that I stopped letting the landing become the story. I could feel the judgment, acknowledge that it was there, and then set it aside without building my life around managing it. That's a different thing from not caring. It's more like informed indifference. I know what you think. I understand why you think it. And I'm choosing not to organize my behavior around your assessment. 25 years after the divorce, that is finally the position I actually occupy. It took that long, but it got there. The fourth thing I stopped caring about, whether my body looks a certain way. I'm 80 years old. I walk every morning. I eat well. I sleep 7 hours. My body does what a reasonable body does when treated with reasonable care. It does not look the way it did at 50. It does not look the way it did at 60. It looks like the body of an 80-year-old woman who has been through a cardiac event and 30 years in a high-stress profession and a divorce and the full business of living. I thought I was doing the right thing caring about appearance. I thought it was self-respect. Some of it was. Some of it was the same imaginary audience I mentioned earlier. At 80, my body is my working condition, not a presentation. I maintain it because I want to be capable, not because I want to be evaluated. That shift took decades. I'm glad it happened. I want to say something to women specifically, since most of what I've been told about caring about appearance came from a culture that directed that message primarily at women. The energy I spent managing appearance, the monitoring, the self-assessment, the comparison, was real energy. It had a cost. It took up space in my head that could have held other things. Not beauty, not care for oneself, those are different. I mean the performance of being evaluated, the constant question of how I was registering. Putting that down made room. For what exactly, I'm still finding out. But the room is there, and room, it turns out, is one of the most valuable things there is. The fifth thing I stopped caring about, resolving the past into something tidy. I used to think that if I understood my marriage well enough, it would be resolved. If I analyzed what went wrong with Karen, I'd find the answer that fixed it. If I traced the decisions I made in my career to their roots, I'd achieve some kind of completion. Analysis is what I do. It's how I was trained to see the world. Identify the problem, understand the mechanism, resolve it. But the past doesn't resolve through analysis. It softens through time and acceptance and the occasional real conversation. But it doesn't close the way a department problem closes. I stopped trying to close it. I let it be unfinished. And without the pressure of resolution, it became easier to live next to. The Karen situation is the clearest example I have. For years, I tried to understand exactly what went wrong, to trace the specific decisions, the specific years, the specific ways I was absent when I should have been present. And I could trace them. I became very good at tracing them. I had the full analysis. And then what? Understanding didn't repair anything. It just made me more precise about what was broken. What actually helped wasn't analysis. It was a plane ticket. It was calling her and saying, "Come." It was sitting at her kitchen table not solving anything, just being there. The unresolved thing is still unresolved, but we are sitting next to it together now, and that is worth more than any analysis I ever produced. The sixth thing I stopped caring about: speed. I was fast for most of my life. Fast reader, fast decision maker, fast talker when I had something to convey. I moved through my days efficiently. Speed felt like competence. At 80, I'm slower, not because I'm impaired, because I chose it. I read more slowly now. I let conversations go where they go without steering them to an outcome. I eat slowly enough to taste what I'm eating. Michael once said, not unkindly, "Mom, you used to be the fastest person in any room." I said, "I know. I'm not sure it helped as much as I thought it did." Speed compresses. It gets the things done. It does not let them breathe. And breathing is, it turns out, where most of the good things happen. I spent 3 hours last Sunday reading a single chapter of a history book, not because I couldn't read faster, because I didn't want to. I wanted to be inside the chapter, to understand where I was before I moved on. That is not something the 50-year-old version of me would recognize as a good use of Sunday. She would have finished the book. She would have moved to the next one. She would not have been in either of them. Presence requires slowness. I wish I had understood that earlier, but I understand it now, and understanding it now means I actually have it, which is more than I had before. The seventh thing I stopped caring about: whether my experience of aging is acceptable to anyone else. There's a particular pressure on women of a certain age to be either dramatically struggling or inspirationally thriving, either the cautionary tale or the triumph narrative. I'm neither. I'm 80. Some days are genuinely good. Some days are difficult in the specific, quiet ways that 80 is difficult. Most days are somewhere in between. I don't need to be performance either direction. I don't need to be more positive than I am so people feel better. I don't need to be more distressed than I am so I register as appropriately affected. I'm allowed to just be 80, without commentary, without apology, without editing myself into a shape that's easier to receive. That is possibly the most freeing thing I've managed, and I got there very late, but I got there. I'll say one more thing about this, because I think it connects to everything I've mentioned. All 7 things I stopped caring about have the same structure underneath. They were all versions of performing for an audience. The imaginary committee evaluating my retirement. The family members judging my divorce. The invisible standard of what an aging woman is supposed to look like, feel like, be like. I spent decades performing, and the performance was exhausting, and the audience, I eventually discovered, was mostly in my head. Not entirely. People do judge. Real audiences exist, but they occupy far less space than I gave them. What lives in the space I reclaimed is quieter and more specific. Karen's voice on the phone, the east window in the morning, the recipe box on the kitchen shelf. Real things, for real reasons. No audience required. Karen's note said, "I thought of you." She was right to. The article was about letting go, and letting go is the thing I've spent my 70s slowly, badly, imperfectly learning. Not because someone told me to, not because a book explained the mechanism, because I got tired of carrying things that weren't helping me anymore. And because Karen sending me an article with a handwritten note is one of the best things that's happened to me in years. I didn't want weight between us anymore, so I started putting things down. If something I said made you think of something you've been carrying, leave me a comment. I want to know. I read every one. And if there's someone in your life who is weighed down by things they no longer need to carry, send this to them. Sometimes all it takes is someone saying, "You can put that down now." You can.